Welcome to the Finding the Magic podcast, where books come alive. I'm Tricia Copeland, a fiction author and host of this show. If you love books, finding great reads, and hearing about the story behind the story directly from the authors, this is the place for you. Whether you like fantasy, science fiction, dystopian, or romance titles, I think you'll find something to love in my playlist. Listen in to discover something magical about a book or two today. Welcome, Lance.
Hi,
How are
good to be here.
you?
I'm doing well, thank you.
Thank you for thank you for coming. Thank you for having me. Thank you for coming. This
Mhm.
is Lance Robinson. He's a speculative fiction author, and your newest release is Chasing New Suns, correct?
That's right.
And it's a compilation of stories, right?
Yes, yeah, it's brought together I guess my best short stories and yeah, put them together in this collection.
Okay. So speculative fiction, for those of us out there who may not know exactly what that is, give us a brief overview.
Different people use slightly different definitions or mean slightly different things, but the most common definition is the speculative fiction is an umbrella that includes science fiction, fantasy, magic realism, science fiction,
Okay.
and horror. And that's the way I usually think of it. It's a broader category that includes those speculative of genres.
Okay. So a little bit of the fantastical, not completely real life, true to life.
Yes. Yeah.
I guess science fiction is supposed to be an extrapolation of our current history. If you look at the like harsh definition, harsh is maybe not the right word, but if you look at the true definition, my husband's a sci-fi lover, and he says no, sci-fi cannot be any fantasy in the sci-fi. I'm like, okay.
Yeah.
Well, tell us about a few of the stories in this book.
Okay, sure. One of the stories is the first story in the book is called 5 Days Until Sunset. It is a story that last year won the Writers of the Future competition. Um, Writers of the Future is an international writing competition for up and coming writers. And the contest runs quarterly, and 5 Days Until Sunset won first place in one of the quarters last year.
Congratulations.
Thank you. It is a far future hard science fiction story um, about well, what I tried to do in that story was one of the things that fascinates me is some of the new discoveries that astronomers are making about planets around other stars in our galaxy and the bizarre diversity of some of these planets. And I wanted to take some of that and some of the awe and wonder that that inspires in me and use it as I often do in writing science fiction, is to link it to some current social and sort of philosophical and political questions that I'm wrestling with. Like, why is it that sometimes we human beings find it so hard to do what we know we need to do? We do that individually. Sometimes I get in a point in my life where I know I need to change something, but it's just so hard to do. And we do it collectively with things like climate change, which, I mean, climate change technically wouldn't be that difficult to solve. The problems are social and political and cultural. And so, in a sense, I use my exploration of what human beings might be doing on a bizarre planet like this to wrestle with some of those kinds of questions. And it's set
Okay.
in a far, far future, like 14,000 years in the future.
So
That's
would you call that a little bit? I mean, I'm getting dystopian feels from this collection. Would you say that's accurate or no?
No, not really. I mean, uh, I think only one of the near future stories is particularly dystopian,
Okay.
and even that one really has a strong light of hope in it. In fact, most of the stories in the collection are really quite hopeful. Um, I think there are enough bleak viewpoints out there, and there's enough bleak literature and bleak entertainment that I don't particularly need to add to it. Now that being said, I'm not I'm not really attracted to reading science fiction that's just light and fluffy. Um, so it's, I try and be honest and look at real world problems, but I think I'm a hopeful person, and I think literature is something that can give people hope and help them see a way through the challenges that we all face.
So we're
And
going to see
so,
our sorry, go ahead.
well, I'm mentioning like a couple of the stories are very near future, very grounded, extrapolated a few decades into our future, and looking at what might happen with this social issue or that political issue, or just sort of imagining what direction might we be going over the next 20 or 30 or 40 years, and using that
Okay.
to explore kinds of problems that human beings face every day.
Yeah, so it sounds like that's a general thread to tie all these stories together. Like you're looking at, human nature and maybe challenges that as a whole or as an individual we might face, and putting characters in positions where you can kind of show those different ideas.
Yes, yeah. Yeah, my I almost always am writing something that's sort of is exploring social questions and issues and philosophical questions and issues. And in particular, I suppose if I mean, more specifically, if there's a common thread in Chasing You Sons, it's is interconnectedness. A few of the stories deal with human interconnectedness with nature, and I think probably all of the stories in one way or another do deal with our interconnectedness with each other as human beings. And they're exploring how do we as human beings respond to that idea, to that recognition that we're one human race and we are all connected, whether we like it or not.
And what is your background? Are you a history person, a science person, a philosophy person?
I'm a social scientist. I mean, I call myself an environmental social scientist. Like most of my research work is on human aspects, the social aspects of managing our natural resources. So that's what I do in my day job.
Oh, okay. So environmental, like policy type.
Yeah,
Oh,
yeah,
okay.
yeah.
Interesting. So I guess that kind of ties in that environmental aspect in your
It
writing. Do you feel?
Yeah, and I guess it's in part an outlet. It's me engaging with environmental questions and issues, and social environmental questions and issues in a way that I can't do in sort of the the research, trying to be official and scientific and um, and dispassionate.
Right. And so why did you decide to do short stories?
Um, I mean, it's not that I am working on a novel at the moment. And so it's not that I only do short stories, but there is something very satisfying about the short story well, both as a reader and as a writer. Um, as a reader, to have this bite-sized little piece of literature, a story, a tale that you can look at and hold in your mind all at once. Um, sit down and read in one setting, and it takes you through the full experience of experiencing a story. And as a writer, it can be very satisfying especially if it comes together and I come up with a story that I'm happy with at the end. I mean, I'm I'm not a visual artist in any way. I don't even dabble in visual arts, but I sort of imagine what a sculptor feels like when they finish a sculpture and they can look at it and, yeah, that's what I had in my head, and I've done it. And I feel that way with short stories. Whereas um, I think writing a novel is an angst-filled process that never quite ends, and you never quite completely fall in love with a novel you're writing and just decide to abandon it at some point when it feels like it's finished.
Oh, you're hurting my heart. See, I think writing short stories is so hard.
Mm.
Like, I'm a novelist. I just finished a 125,000 word novel, and I feel great about it. But
Okay.
I was chosen to write in this anthology, and they said, okay, it's 5,000 words. Now that was really hard for me. I think, I mean, maybe you have to, I mean, it's definitely a different brain. You have to be really concise. You have to have, can't have subplots. You can't have extraneous characters. You have to be just like really focused on these characters, this plot, this one. I think it's harder, but maybe I guess it's depending on what you're used to and what you're practiced at.
Yeah. I think it probably is harder in that sense. Um, I mean, it's oh, I was looking for a metaphor. It's like being able to do 40 meter hurdle race and then do a high jump at the end. And whereas, novel is more like running a marathon. And you
Right.
don't have to you don't run the marathon all that fast, but it does take the stamina.
Right. Neat. So you said you are working on a novel?
I am. I am. In fact, it's a prequel to the short story I talked about, First 5 Days Until Sunset.
Oh, okay.
I just the I love the world building aspect of writing science fiction and the culture and the world, the ecosystems, just the whole package just looks to me rich with other possibilities, and I wanted to explore and explore some of the characters that are in the story as what as at the beginning of that short story is okay, well, how did they get there? That might be a story in itself. And so that's the novel I'm working on now.
Oh, fun. Yeah. A lot of my novels have happened that way. Like, I was writing a short story for an anthology and then couldn't let the characters or the world go, and I needed to expand
Yeah.
that. So
Yeah.
I think that's a fun way to do it. So Chasing New Suns, is that your first publication?
It's my first book publication, yes.
Okay.
Yeah. I've been publishing short stories in small press magazines and so on for decades. I think my first one was in 1990, but yeah, the Chasing New Suns is my first book.
Neat. Well, congratulations.
Well, thank you.
Can you tell us about a few of the other stories in the book? How many total are there?
7.
7. Okay.
Okay. One is, I mean, I don't write a lot of humor, but there are once in a while I do, and so there's a couple of sort of sci-fi satire pieces in the book. One of them is it's in part sort of a tribute to the great American short story writer O. Henry. Um, and one of his most famous short stories was called The Gift of the Magi. And so I've written a sci-fi romantic comedy satire set in the near future, called The Gig of the Magi. And it's a little bit romantic, it's a little bit silly, and it's also sort of a look at the gig economy and and the people out there who I was for a little time in between part-time jobs who work from contract to contract, whether it's Uber drivers or people who do editing or whatever it might be when they're paid in little bits here and there through these various gig economy platforms. So the Gig of the Magi is a short little story about a guy who's trying to make it working um, as a environmental engineer in sewage systems, and occasionally he gets hired to be the governor of one American state or another, because at that time in the near future, those are also hired on 2-week and 3-week contracts, and he has experience working with children, so he's got good qualifications to work as a political leader. And meanwhile, he's looking for love and not having time to to even go out with his friends to the bar and meet anyone.
Interesting.
Um, I've spent a lot of time in Africa. I just moved back to Canada 4 years ago, and I mentioned that because a couple of the stories, one of the stories is set partly in Africa and partly on a, a spaceship. Um, and one of the other stories is set in South Africa in the apartheid era. So I'll say a little bit about that one. It's called The Thursday Plan. And it's sort of a multiverse kind of story that starts in another version of our reality, in a version of our reality in which apartheid never fell. And the main character is part of a revolutionary cell trying to find a way to overthrow the apartheid regime. But in the meantime, he's starting to, through various things that happen in the novel, he's in the short story, he's finding connections with other realities, including the reality in which apartheid did collapse in 1994, which is our reality. And
yeah, that seems like it would be a really neat thing to explore, and like just the hope he would have and the frustration he would have over, okay, this could really happen, but it's not yet. And yeah.
And then again, it's part of that theme I'm exploring in most of the stories in the book, of people trying to see what is their role in making the world a better place.
Yeah, it seems like that's sort of a, like if you're, is there one, is that sort of the overarching like idea behind this whole publication?
I suppose it is. I mean, I didn't set out purposely to only pull together stories that had a common theme. Like basically, I went back through my portfolio of stories that I'd published in the past, and I tried to pick the best ones. But I think it happens. I mean, that's the kind of thing I tend to write. So it just kind of worked out that way.
And are these adult stories then?
Yes, I mean, I'd say they're pretty much PG-13. I'm aimed at an adult audience, but uh, there's nothing that would prevent anyone from giving it to their 12-year-old if I've got a 12-year-old in the house who's a fan of science fiction. In fact, I just had a heartwarming review posted by someone who bought my book at a convention a couple weeks ago, and this husband and wife were there with their son, who's about 9 years old, I think. And this was like a science fiction fantasy comic book convention. So the son was into the cosplay, and he had this amazing costume from the Halo series of games. And he could have been on a movie set and it would have looked perfect. It was just an amazing costume, and he won the cosplay. Anyway, they bought my book at that convention, and they just posted a review yesterday. The father and the son read it together, and they'd read a story and then they'd discuss it together. And so they just posted a review, and it was heartwarming to read.
That is really neat. Yeah. That as an author, those are the best ones, right? When you can make those connections and then somebody
Yes.
like really connected with your book as well.
Yeah. No, and I've found that I enjoy the face-to-face events, book signings and conventions and book fairs and things like that. Um, a lot of authors these days have to pay attention to algorithms and how Amazon works and social media and all that stuff, and I do that too, but that face-to-face connection at some kind of in-person event, you can't beat it.
Yeah, I really love that too. That's why I started this podcast, because I started it right in 2020. I started thinking about it because I miss like seeing my author friends talking about books, talking about writing. And then I said, well, if I start a podcast, then I can get to talk to my friends and people will learn about our books. So it was a win-win.
Yeah. Yeah.
When you read, what do you read?
Mostly science fiction. I mean, a little bit of nonfiction, in various kind of fields. Fantasy sometimes too. But yeah, mostly science fiction.
Do you have some authors that are your favorite?
Oh, well, one of them from decades ago was John Brunner. John Brunner had a series of novels, sort of near future, gritty political, social extrapolation, just looking at our world and trying to see what it was. Um, one of his novels, I can't remember if this one was late 60s or early 70s, it described the internet, and he got a few things wrong. He imagined us doing the internet at phone booths, but so much else of what he described was like just bang on the money of what happened. So he's one of my favorite, John Brunner. Robert J. Sawyer, a Canadian science fiction author. He writes what some people call philosophical science fiction, not philosophical in the abstract sort of navel-gazing sense, but I mean, like me, he addresses social issues and entertaining stories, but not what you would call just sort of escapist, fluffy kind of stuff.
Not the
It's not
Martian,
merely
right?
entertainment. It's dealing with social and cultural and political kinds of issues in a thoughtful way. So yeah, I really enjoy Robert Sawyer's books as well.
Fun. Well, if people want to find your new book, where would they look?
I guess the best place is to go to my website, lancerobinsonwriter.com. That's all one word, LANCE, Robinson, spelled the usual way, writer, lancerobinsonwriter.com. And there's a page within my website for this book specifically, and they can find it there, as well as links to my social media and my newsletter and things like that.
Fun. Well, thank you so much for being on the show and talking with us, and I hope you'll come back when you have your new novel published.
I'd love to. Thanks for having me. Yeah, great chat. Great to chat.
Great. Thanks. Bye.
Okay, bye-bye.
I hope you enjoyed this episode of the Finding the Magic podcast. I'm your host, author and podcaster Tricia Copeland, and I love getting behind the scenes. If you like the podcast, make sure to subscribe and stop in each week to discover new authors and books. Thanks for listening, and until next time, keep finding the magic.